there, and welcome to another episode of Preachers on Preaching. You know, we come out of seminary believing that if you preach it, they will come. And usually we are sorely dispossessed of that notion early on in our ministry. What we want is that our preaching leads to congregational vitality. I had a great conversation with the Reverend Dr. Russ Levenson. He is the rector of St. Martin's Episcopal Church in Houston, the largest Episcopal parish that there is. And he has some great things to say about the role of the sermon in congregational vitality and the role that other things must play as well, all going to support what comes out of the pulpit. I found this to be a very helpful conversation, and I think you will too. The Reverend Dr. Russ Levenson, thank you for being on this episode of Preachers on Preaching. Thank you for your time today.
Glad to be here with you. Thank you.
Yeah, you are the rector of St. Martin's Church in Houston, a little village church there in Houston with about 10,000 members. So we're really delighted for you to take the time today. Can you just start us off with just a brief bio, a little intro?
Yeah, first I'll say how fortunate the people at Church of the Savior are to have you as their rector. So
thank you so much.
Hats off to them for calling you there, and I know you have a good and important ministry there, and we thank you for that work. I've been here almost 14 years, 13 and a half years. Came from Christchurch, Pensacola, where I'd been for 5, and before that in Lafayette. Actually grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, where you served for a little bit.
Yep.
And my wife and I, we've been married almost 37 years.
Okay.
And we have 3 adult children, 2 grandchildren. And I'm a graduate of Virginia Seminary, 92, and I have a doctor of ministry from Beeson Divinity School in Birmingham on the campus of Stanford University.
Yeah, well, 37 years of marriage, you must be married to a wonderful woman because you don't have a single gray hair on your head. So, yeah.
That's why I go get haircuts to cut off my gray.
Russ, who would you say has had the most influence on you as a preacher?
I think a couple of folks, but probably right at the front of the line is John Claypool, who was rector of St. Luke's, Birmingham, at the end of his Episcopal priesthood before he retired and did some preaching and teaching. But I worked for him for 6 years, 2 tours of duty, once before seminary, where I learned a lot about things that needed to be kind of worked out in my life, actually. And then I was brought back after seminary after doing a year at Sewanee as a chaplain. And John was well known as a master teacher, preacher.
Yeah, he's a legend.
And spent lots of time listening to him and learning from him. But a great gift he gave to me was before my first sermon, when I went back as a priest under his tenure. And we were actually walking into the early service, and I think he sensed my angst because to kind of preach in his shadow was...
I bet.
And he kind of pulled me aside and he said, you give them what you have. And he said, you should treat preaching as a gift. Just like you go out to the store before Christmas and you buy somebody a gift and you take it home, you wrap it up, and you're going to give them that gift. And he said, some people like your gift and some people don't. But don't get caught up and worried about whether or not and I think in a sense he was saying, you don't have to compete with me, just be yourself. Yeah. And it really helped relieve me of a lot of things.
Well, it's obviously a conversation It
30
had
years,
lasting
about
impression.
29 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
But John, certainly big influence. John Stott was a big influence on me as a mentor for many years. We had a friendship, visited almost every time I went to the UK. We had time together. We had a writing relationship with each other.
Mm.
And that was an important thing. And I think the question you ask, Joe, is an important one, because one of the things I have found, and I'll just put some things out there, which is why you're having this, lacking in some clergy these days, is the effective incorporation of mentors in their lives. And by mentors, I don't mean contemporaries. I have begun to, as I interview clergy to come on staff at St. Martin's, I've begun to ask them, who are your mentors? And I'm shocked to find many of them don't have mentors. Or they'll say, well, I hang out with my friends and we banter and we have a circle of conversation among our friends. And I'll say, now, who are the older, wiser people that you turn to for godly counsel? And I used to call John Claypool all the time until his death. And I would add Fleming Rutledge has become a mentor and a friend over the years, even though we've probably only had about 3 or 4 sit-down conversations. I did have her preach at one of my churches where I served, but we write each other, email each other, and I'll from time to time turn to her before particular events. And so, but I think all 3 of them are mentors, and they've a little older than I am, and have taught me a lot.
Good. Thank you. Well, the topic today, and I think you're well suited for this, is preaching for congregational vitality. So tell me, just in your own mind, so we know what we're aiming at, how would you define congregational vitality?
Great question too. I think first and foremost is a congregation that is firmly committed to proclaiming Christ and Him crucified. 1 Corinthians 2:2. I've been a rector 3 times, and in each place I had put on a little brass plaque in the first 2 that verse, and I myself screwed it into the pulpit.
Yes.
And then when I came to St. Martin's, there was actually a little panel on the back of the pulpit that was open, and I had it carved into the pulpit. And so if you come to St. Martin's, it's right where the preacher kind of climbs into the pulpit. So, I mean, I think anytime you kind of try too hard to get one way or another off of bringing Christ into the center of the congregation, you begin to lose some ground, if not forget altogether your mission there. Owen Thomas, who's a theologian we read way back in the day when I was in seminary, wrote in a little book years ago. He said, if you try too hard to make your message relevant, make the gospel relevant, you may actually lose the ability to be relevant and simply become a sanctification of the culture around you. So I see a lot of clergy these days, and I hear a lot of sermons that are directed to really trying to connect to people through the culture, rather than using Christ to speak to the culture, to transform the culture. And so I would say, if you were to listen to a variety of sermons on our website at St. Martin's, 80% of them are about coming to terms with one's need for salvation, coming to terms with one's sin and the need for forgiveness and mercy, and then coming into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Charles Simeon, who is one of my folks I love to read, and I'm sad that more people don't know about him, but he's an incredible figure and served that little church for 50 years in Cambridge. Used to say the goal of preaching should be to humble the sinner, exalt the Savior, and promote holiness.
Right.
All 3 of those. And so I think the goal of vitality in preaching should be to do those things, an organic process. But so I think in many ways it does start in the pulpit. That's the open door, what John Claypool used to call the preaching moment. I mean, that's where we connect with most of the people. And now in the virtual world we're living in, even more. Our congregational touch has doubled through the virtual world we're living in right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it doesn't stop there, of course. And it, you've got to have a church that's engaged in effective discipleship. Are people growing in their relationship with Christ? Are people finding a ministry in the church? Are people actively giving of their time? And frankly, are they giving of their resources? Are they giving back to the work of Christ from the treasures he's entrusted to them? And then I do think a church has to be engaged in outreach beyond its doors. Every church I've served seems to have been hit at one point or another by some kind of natural disaster.
Mm-hmm.
I won't connect the two.
Well,
When I was in
yours
Pensacola,
certainly.
we were hit with a huge Hurricane Ivan, when I was in Pensacola.
Mm.
We did not decrease our giving to outreach that year. I've been through Harvey here. We didn't decrease our giving down. In fact, our giving to outreach increased during that time. This would have been a year to cut back. I was actually looking at the numbers last night, and we continue to maintain a good 25% of our budget outside the doors of the parish. But we don't give where we don't have boots on the ground as well.
That's good. Well, St. Martin's is the largest Episcopal church in the country. Describe what role has preaching played in the story of St. Martin's success?
Yeah, I had 3 predecessors, and I think preaching has been an important part of the life of the church there. My immediate predecessor, Larry Gibson, was an outstanding preacher and teacher. I have a wonderful group of clergy. I have fortunate to work with about 12 clergy at St. Martin's, and we all kind of roll through the pulpit. As rector, I do that the most, but I do liberally share the pulpit. Particularly, I will say more when we're in person. We're back in person now, but the clergy all kind of felt that it was important for the rector to have more of the pulpit time during the pandemic. But I again, are we preaching sermons that are engaging? Are we preaching sermons that are offering something to people that help them transform their lives? And I would say, and I'll go back to, again, that Charles Simeon piece, Joe. I think it's really important, particularly for churches in the evangelical strain, which you and I serve, to work beyond. There's a real, and I see it some right now in our own church, and even in the evangelical branch of the Episcopal Church. And I mean evangelical in the best sense of the word, not the political sense that we're hearing now. To simply talk about the grace of our Lord and to affirm people's sinfulness and need for that grace, but then to leave them there. And I don't think that helps. I think people are drawn to Christ because they want a transformed life. And so to hear a sermon, which I've heard over the years, particularly the last 5 or 6 years, I see this kind of strain of people who are reluctant to say, yeah, we are a mess, and Christ actually has the power to bring you out of that mess. I wrote down a couple of quotes knowing we were going to John Stott, again, hero of mine. He says, the once for all crisis of justification, our acceptance before God, must lead to a continuing process of sanctification, our growth in holiness, what Peter means by growing up in our salvation. And A.W. Tozer, who wrote just a generation ago, began to see this kind of creeping into the evangelical branch of the church, and it really disturbed him in his book, The Pursuit of God. He wrote this: the whole transaction of religious conversion has been made mechanical and spiritless. Faith may now be exercised without a jar to the moral life and without embarrassment to the ego. Christ may be received without creating any special love for him in the spirit of the receiver. The human being is saved, but he's not hungry or thirsty after God. In fact, he's specifically taught to be satisfied and encouraged to be content with little. If all we offer people who come to our churches is God loves you, God cares for you, God accepts you as you are, which we believe. But you can't read the Gospels, can't read the Sermon on the Mount, and not know that beyond the experience of salvation, we're called to grow in that salvation.
Mhm.
And I think that leads to congregational vitality. I
Mm.
think growing in that, what if you or I, both of us are married, and what if all we believed in was the marriage service? That's it. I'm done. I don't have to grow in a love relationship with my wife. I mean,
Mhm.
I hope after 30, almost 40 years, I hope I'm a better husband now than I was 40 years ago. I'm not a perfect husband. I still
Of course.
blow it lots of times, but because I've loved my wife more and more, I want to be more and more of the husband she needs and I think the Lord calls me to be. And I think the same is true of our relationship with Christ. Once we enter that relationship, yes, we're saved. Yes, we're saved by grace. But to believe that that's all there is to the Christian life, there's, frankly, to me, there's nothing really exciting or organic about that. So I get excited by the process of sanctification,
Mhm.
which won't be through till the other side, as we know.
Yeah.
And I get excited when I'm renewed by the forgiveness I get because I screw up all the time.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the constant need for the grace and mercy of Christ is always before me. But to wake up every morning and say, created me a new heart, oh God, and renew a right spirit within me. That's my morning prayer, and I like it.
Yeah, that strain that you're talking about that is reluctant. I think what they would say, and I'm very exposed to, I think,
Mhm.
to that strain. I mean, they would say that that grace actually pushes us towards sanctification. There's not a great gap between justification and sanctification. But what you're saying is that we need to articulate what that looks like.
Absolutely, yeah, I think so.
That's helpful. That's helpful. So more generally, then, how important, not just for St. Martin's, but for every congregation, is the weekly sermon in the spiritual vitality of a congregation?
Yeah,
Mhm.
I remember you probably did this. We had field work at VTS, Virginia
Yeah.
Seminary, and we were told to go visit churches and kind of figure out which one was a good fit. And I remember going to one in the DC area, and the sermon was horrible. It was it was preached without any kind of emotion. I think the fella looked at the floor most of the time. It was not engaging. It was so dry, and I thought to myself, well, there's no wonder there's only 8 people in the pews. So, and I do think it's crucial, and not only for the ongoing uh, uh, growth of the people who are in the pews, but also the people who are wandering into the pews. I do demographic studies every few years here at St. Martin's, which you can easily do through secular sources. And there's a survey that recently showed within a 5-mile radius of St. Martin's, about 30% of the people don't have any worshiping community, regardless of denomination or faith tradition. And the same study showed about 30% are looking for
Mm.
that kind of experience. And so to keep in mind that every week we preach, we're not just preaching to our own, we're likely preaching to people who are wandering in looking for that. And so to have a lot of people are going to come for that 15-20 minute moment where they connect with a person in the pulpit, and that's an opportunity to say, this is who we are, this is what we're about, this is who we're called to be.
Mhm. Every every parish, when they're looking for a new rector, that at the top of the list is we want a dynamic public speaker. We
Right.
want an excellent preacher, because they believe and they know, I think instinctively, that is, as you say, really important for the growth of a parish, and of course attract young members, new members. But what are they right about that? Is the excellence of the preaching really that important? Is there more to it than just the dynamism of the preacher?
Yes, and I'm glad you asked that question. As I get older and I'm toward the end zone my ministry, I actually get calls now from churches who are in searches, and not necessarily looking for. They might be looking for names, but they might be looking for what kind of rector, should we be looking for? And twice this year, I've engaged with two kind of mid-sized congregations, both corporate size, but kind of in the middle of that. And they've tuned into good preachers. We've talked to so and so. It seems like a really good preacher, and that's what we need. And I've said, hold up there. I said, you could have a really good preacher who's horrible with people, who's not a good pastor. If it's a larger church, which does require administrative skills, it requires the ability to work well with people. It requires, as you know, in Florida, I didn't know how to deal with insurance until my church was blown away by Hurricane Ivan. But I mean, I know now. And I said, you don't want just a good preacher. I've known good preachers who were horrible pastors.
Yes.
I've known good pastors who were horrible preachers. There's no one person who fits all of the model. That's why I like about being in larger churches, because we can kind of fill in the holes with gifted people. But if you just go, as I said to both of these churches, do not go for the shiny penny. I said, because churches now want to. Does this rector that you're looking at, or priest that you're looking at, does what he or she preaches in the pulpit, is it revealed in their life? So do they, if they talk about love and compassion, if they talk about personal discipleship, do they, if they talk about having a devotional life, do they have all of those things?
Yeah.
And then, as you and I know, you're a rector. I mean, we have to make hard decisions too. I mean, there are times when staff don't work out, and we have to let those staff go. And that's never easy. And it's a complex job, as you know, it's a wonderful job. I've loved every day. There's not a day I've regretted being what God has called me to be. I've never woken up and gone, I really don't want to go and be engaged in work. There are days that I didn't like, or days that were really hard. But yeah, I think if you just look at the preaching gift, you may get a great preacher, and by the third week you're going, oh my gosh, who is this person? It's kind of like when you go to the shoe store and try on your shoes, and you go, oh, these fit great. And then you get them home and you wear them for 3 days and go, oh my gosh, I got the wrong shoe.
And you can't give what you don't have. I mean, you can talk about it. I can talk about millions of dollars, but I don't have millions of dollars. So you can't give away what you don't have. So I really appreciate that point. In fact, we've got a whole episode at the end of this series on the preacher's piety, which is we've already recorded, and it's fantastic. So what can then, talk about the preacher's piety a little bit. What can a preacher do? What must a preacher do to prepare him or herself for the pulpit, particularly aiming for congregational vitality?
Yeah. Well, I love you can't give what you don't have. Now, I think it's safe, Joe, to say I have not done this perfectly. But since coming to faith, which was July of 1979, a long time ago, well before I even considered the priesthood, I've always had a morning quiet time, which was what we hear about, and at least a quiet time at some point during the day. And I've never let go of that. There's certainly days, there have been weeks where I've had to get up in the morning and say, Lord, my list, but I got to go. I got to go meet with Joe for a Zoom. Although I said my prayers this morning. But I regularly sit down in the mornings, and I will read my Bible, and I'll usually have some sort of devotional book by my side. During the pandemic, one of my goals was to reread John Stott's The Cross of Christ, which I just read the conclusion of 2 days ago. And I read it slow. I don't read it. I'm not trying to finish it. I just read it very little bit by bit. Yeah. And I just finished that great book again the other day. And then I will go into my time of prayer, which involves my own confession and my own prayers for those I love and care about, and that's all separated from praying specifically that the sermon I give this Sunday morning will be, something that really touches people's lives. It's trying to keep that relationship alive. So when I step in the pulpit, people, at least I hope, sense that it's an authentic relationship.
Mm.
Now on Sunday mornings, I will tell you what has been my practice for many years now. And I mainly do this on the Sundays that I preach, not when my Sundays preach. But when I do get up in the morning, I hit my knees and say a brief prayer. And I always re-go through my sermon before I get to church. I actually do that on a treadmill so that I'm waking up a little bit. And then I try to get to church about an hour early before most people begin to creep in. We might have some folks who are getting there. And my practice over the years has been to move through the church and touch every pew and pray that what I offer that day is something that brings people into that relationship with Christ. And then I'll find a little place to kneel down in the pews and finish those prayers. It's not, my congregation knows that now, so it's not something but I don't make a show of it. It's something, one of the reasons I go early. But to make sure that Jesus is involved in that process, that I'm more concerned that, again, 1 Corinthians 2:2, I'm more concerned that people see Jesus than they think something was witty or funny or remarkable, or and obviously I don't always get that right.
Well, that's actually a great segue to my next question, and that is that particularly in the culture we live in now, how can an able preacher who is seen by their congregation as dynamic, and many people come because of that preacher, how can they preach for congregational vitality without creating a sort of cult of personality?
Mm-hmm. I think by being I really do think by being who you are. I mean, and if who you are is an honest engagement, then without a performa personality, I think people get that over time. I mean, I've been around clergy who have a different personality in the pulpit than they do in the office. You probably know John Barr. Do you remember John Barr? John's a mentor of mine. He and I are still good friends, and he and I were at a conference probably 40 years before I was in ministry, I think, and we were at a conference in Maryland somewhere, and we attended this liturgy, and this fellow was leading the liturgy, and he had a lovely British accent. And we were walking away. I said something to John about, oh gosh, I wonder where he's from. And he said, he's from Baltimore. And he had developed a British persona when he led the liturgy. And I've always thought of that. So
who you're talking about. That's funny.
Okay. So but I do think certainly, and maybe when we're younger, when I'm younger, I cared more about what people thought of me, which is a dangerous and slippery slope. Yeah. I do care now that I don't dissuade people from following Christ, or that I do offer theology that's non-biblical or unorthodox. I care about those things now. I don't care that much about whether people are impressed with what comes out of my mouth or the way it comes out. And I've had some incredible, funny, humbling moments like that. I've had somebody, my first Easter here at St. Martin's, which was a big day. That was an important day for me. My first Easter at St. Martin. And I had a guy at the early service pass out in the pew from right in the middle of my sermon from a heart episode. And I thought, okay. And then a few weeks into my first week here at St. Martin's, we had a malfunction of a light bulb right above the pulpit that just started going on and off, just on and off. And those were incredibly humbling experiences that knocked me off my knees right away.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. Let me ask you this: is the sermon enough to mature a congregation's faith, or are there other things that a parish ought to be engaged in? And I think you may have mentioned some of those at the outset. But What are some things that a parish needs to do in order to support what comes out of the pulpit?
Yeah. No, I don't think the sermon's enough. I mean, and you see that in the Gospels when Jesus said, "Follow me." Of course, you and I know what he meant by that was not follow me to church.
Mhm.
He meant
Mhm.
follow me. You're going to join me in life. We're going to eat together. You're going to see me perform miracles together. You're going to be with me the night before I die. You're going to be with me or at a distance when I go to the cross. So no, I mean, I think that beyond the pulpit is the follow me moment. And
Mhm.
what happens after that is an engaged life of discipleship with Christ, where we are honed and carved and sculpted for a lifetime. And that happens through active engagement in personal devotion. It happens through a continued review. I do think, I mean, I take seriously confession and asking for the mercy of Christ. I know it's there available to me, but I visit my sins daily, not with a cat of nine tails. I visit that with the remarkable knowledge that the grace of Christ precedes all that. But I have to continue to visit that.
Yeah.
And then I think we need to encourage our members to do that. But I do think, I tell people when you join St. Martin's, we actually have what we call a covenant, a maturity covenant, and
Mhm.
we have them sign it. And we ask them to, within 6 months, to be engaged in an adult education. If you're adult, youth, child, but you're going to get engaged in some form of Christian education here at
Mhm.
St. Martin's, and then you are going to find your ministry, and we'll help you with all those things. But this is a whole life decision. So no, I think preaching is the follow me moment.
Mhm. That's great. That's a great way to put that. And this may be a related question, but I think we come out of seminary with the dreams that if you preach it, they will come. All you have to do is preach the gospel, and you're going to fill up these pews. And we're usually dispossessed of that notion fairly early on in actual ministry. Um, so what are some other things that must be in place within a parish in order to achieve vitality?
Um, I do think uh, I believe that let's say you're at and I've been there. I've been in a church where I was the only priest. So
Mhm.
if you're the only priest, getting your leadership on the same page.
Yes.
So as the vestry, if it's you in the vestry, are you all on the same page? Are they there just to do business, or are they there to support? And I actually believe that. I actually believe that the vestry is there to support the rector in his or her vision,
Mhm.
because they've called that rector. They're not there to. They're not a board of a non-prof. They're there to be engaged in spiritual work. If it's a group of clergy, are the clergy on the same page? So that's really important. I mean, that's something that corporations are doing pretty vibrantly now. They're really, or do you fit into our culture
Right.
of the way in which we do business?
Mhm.
And so, young, old, white, black, male, female, none of those things come into play at St. Martin's. But do you understand who we are? And so I feel that very strongly, that the clergy should be on the same page, leadership should be on the same page, and I think in time the membership should be on the same page. One of the things that we do, Joe, at St. Martin's is we have a membership class. So it's about a 6-hour experience. They get 3 hours with me and 3 hours with another members of the staff. And you have to go through that before you join, even if you're coming from another Episcopal church.
Mhm.
So you can't join without doing that. And a big part of that is our saying, this is who we are. And this is what, and I actually said, this is what we expect of our members. If you're joining, I'm going to hand you a pledge card, and you're not a member, an active member in good standing, until you fill this out. We want you in the pews. We want you to be involved in ministry, so I think having that oneness of understanding is really important.
That's so good. I mean, I think we are so eager to get people in the pews that we
Yeah.
make the bar really low.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is we actually raise the bar high, and people rise to the challenge. If you don't require anything of them, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah. And it's not about, as you know, it's not about earning anything. It's not about, we cover all that with grace.
Yeah, sure.
But this is the world in which we live. And I remember saying to a member who I said, when you're going to go through this 101 experience, it's about 6 hours. And here in Houston, if you go to the DMV to get your license, it's going to be about 3 hours. And so and this person kind of grumbled a little bit. And I kind of jokingly said, well, you're probably going to stand in the line at the DMV for 3 hours for your driver's license. Don't you think your church attendance is and membership is a little bit more important than that? So,
at least twice as important. Yeah,
they came along, by the way. So.
Well, this is so helpful. It's helpful to me if nobody else watches it. Really, me. What any other thoughts that you have about preaching or the state of preaching for Vitality today?
Yeah. And I thought of this the other day because I was having a conversation actually with some members at the church about, and kind of floated around some of what we're talking about. I mean, I think we should always realize that every bit of ministry counts. What comes out of your mouth. Yes, the things that people see, but the things that people don't see. I mentioned before, I had a writing relationship with John Stott. He had lots of people around the world who called him Uncle John. He loved to write handwritten letters and stay in touch with you. And I will tell you, and we can end on this. I don't know what your time limit is, but early in my ministry, again, kind of like the John Claypool moment. I was a young priest in Birmingham, and we were assigned to go, and you might have had this, several of the young clergy were assigned to go to one of the local retirement homes once a month. And then we're kind of on a rota to do, it was the diocesan retirement home, and to preach and celebrate the liturgy. I was a lot younger and a lot cockier and a lot more self-important then, I hope, than I am now. And you would go to that service, and I can, if I close my eyes, I can see myself in that particular service. And I remember thinking, this is just such a waste of my time, because there would only be about 5 to 10 people, and many of them were in various stages of dementia or Alzheimer's, and they'd be calling out, and they'd be saying things aloud, and they had a CD they would put in for the music, and I was sitting in the back on one of these. I guess we did it on a Wednesday, vested and ready to offer my I thought to myself, I really could be doing bigger things in another place this hour, 1 hour out of my life. And they wheeled in this one woman, and she was just babbling away. And I'm being quite transparent here. And I thought to myself, I thought to myself at that moment, what a complete waste of my time. And at that moment, that woman stopped babbling. And she said, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. I believe in his son, our Lord Jesus Christ. And she went through the whole creed. And then she finished. And then she said, oh God, please help me. And then she went back to babbling. And I never, from that day forward, I hope, but it was like Jesus had come in and kicked me right in the gut. And I needed that kick. And it was a reminder that everything we do, if there are 2 people in the pews, if there's one person in the pew to whom you're preaching, it matters. And it matters to the work you and I are called to do.
Well, for you, that's an incredible story. And for you to say that you're much more sort of had a sense of self-importance as a green assistant than you do as the rector of the largest church in the country, that really is instructive for all of us. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Russ, God bless you. This is
really
helpful. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you for asking me to come along And my greetings to your congregation. They're very fortunate to have you there.
Thank you so much. God bless you, my friend.
Thank you. Take care.
All right.